Around 2 years ago, I made a video talking about a species of salamander that is common throughout the Pacific Northwest, known as the long-toed salamander. If you guys want to check out more about the salamander, by the way, I would recommend going back to this video that I made, so that you guys have an understanding of what I'm going to be talking about today. But long story short, the long-toed salamander is a small, 3-inch salamander that is found throughout the western U.S., from as far north as the Alexander Archipelago in Alaska, and as far south as the Sierra Nevada Mountains in California, and as far east as the Rocky Mountains in Idaho and Montana. And so this is a huge range for a salamander, and it's so big in fact that scientists have identified several subspecies of the salamander across different parts of their range. For example, there's the eastern long-toed salamander, a subspecies found in the eastern part of its range in Idaho and Montana, the western long-toed salamander, a subspecies found from the western part of their range along the coast of Washington and Oregon, the central long-toed salamander with the largest range, that is found from Alaska to central Oregon, and the southern long-toed salamander, a species found from the southern parts of its range in southern Oregon and California. All of these subspecies can be differentiated by both the region that they're found in and the yellow patterning that they have on their backs, which can sometimes be either a long yellow stripe across its back or dotted, just a bunch of dots around their back, a bunch of yellow dots. So it's a pretty simple and generic taxonomic ordering of the species, and it would have stayed this way if it wasn't for one subspecies. You see, going back to my original video, I mentioned the subspecies I just mentioned right now, but I forgot to mention one that I decided to save for a separate video just because of how strange it is and how interesting this subspecies is compared to the rest of them. And it's also probably the one that a lot of people probably know more about compared to the rest of the species. In fact, when it comes to this subspecies of long-toed salamander, you could say it's what I would like to call an anomaly of the long-toed salamander. This is the Santa Cruz long-toed salamander. But what exactly is it, and why would somebody consider it to be a species anomaly? So, the Santa Cruz long-toed salamander is a subspecies of the aforementioned long-toed salamander, mainly found in a few small ponds around Monterey Bay, from the city of Aptos to Moss Landing, and in the area between them. In this range, they inhabit the ponds around the oak woodlands and coastal chaparral environments around this area. In this range, they mainly feed on small insects like grasshoppers and aquatic insect larvae, as well as spiders and earthworms, and hunt by ambushing their prey, either on land or in water. They themselves have to worry about predators in their range, however, especially garter snakes, larger amphibians like invasive bullfrogs, predatory fish, birds like belted kingfishers, herons, and egrets, and small mammals like shrews and raccoons. Because of this, they utilize several different methods to escape predators, mainly through toxic measures like poison that is secreted through their tail, dropping their tails like a lizard to escape, and also by simply being nocturnal and hiding in burrows throughout the day. As for breeding, they mainly follow a similar pattern to the other subspecies and basically the species as a whole, but they have a little bit of differences. For starters, adults move from small animal burrows in the aforementioned oak woodlands and chaparral during the dry seasons between May and October to these temporary ponds, or correct me if I say this wrong, ephemeral ponds during the rainy season between January and March. Males are the first ones to arrive, and they begin mating with the females around late January to February, where the females lay about 5 to 8 eggs. These eggs then hatch around March and metamorphosize into the adults by late spring, before the dry season begins. So I would say maybe you'd probably start seeing adults by like late April, early May. After this, they wait for the next rainy season to come to repeat the process all over again. So when it comes to its life history, as you probably could tell, the Santa Cruz long-toed salamander's life is basically similar to the majority of, or I guess all of the species itself, like all the other subspecies. Again, the only difference being their range and the habitats that they live in, which, speaking of their range actually, let's get to answering the question that I'm sure a lot of you have probably clicked the video on for, and the whole reason for this video. Why is there just a random population of long-toed salamanders in California that's like separated from the rest of the species? Well, from what I've researched, the main answer to this question has to do with the Ice Age. You see, during the Ice Age around 20,000 to 10,000 years ago, their population was larger due to a cooler environment and a lack of glaciers in that area compared to the northern range where they encompass today. But as the Ice Age began to end and the climate began to warm, this population began to shrink as the majority stayed east in the Sierra Nevada and began to move north, while the coastal population began to shrink to the population it is now. And now in the modern day, the closest population to the Santa Cruz long-toed salamander is the southern long-toed salamander in Tuolumne County. Again, correct me if I said that wrong, which is approximately 215 miles away. So the closest subspecies, the closest population of long-toed salamanders from the Santa Cruz ones is basically 250 miles away, which is extremely far for populations like that. Both these populations actually have some differences in terms of appearance, which is something I probably should have brought up earlier. With the southern long-toed salamander having a long yellow back like I mentioned before, but the Santa Cruz long-toed salamander has more of this blotched pattern with like more spots than a line. And it's also just fully black basically along its body and tail. So as you could see, physically and geographically, it's truly what I would consider to be a sort of relic from another time, as it is one of the last remaining populations or subpopulations of the species left. But unfortunately, their numbers have begun to drop due to the urbanization of the area through agriculture, highways, and construction over these ponds that they breed in. They are now considered endangered, and their numbers continue to fall, which is not a good thing because there are not a lot of them left, and their area is extremely small. However, efforts have been made to preserve their habitat and protect the subspecies through ecological preserves and pond management in their range, which right now is what's helping to keep the species afloat. Overall, this is definitely a unique subspecies that deserved its own video, even if its life history is basically the same as the rest of the subspecies. And while there's lots of issues surrounding the Santa Cruz long-toed salamander's endangerment, different groups, the California Fish and Wildlife, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and all these other groups have assisted in helping to conserve the subspecies and prevent their extinction, which is really good because, like I said, this is a literal Ice Age relic, and hopefully more help can be done to help protect the species because it's such a unique subspecies, and it's really strange how they even ended up in Monterey Bay, and they're what I would still consider to be not only an Ice Age relic but a species anomaly. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys next time.